Thank you, Kawalji. First of all, it's a pleasure to be with you again. I think yesterday we had a very exciting session and an introduction as to what SHIP is, how it might work, how it might apply to different types of medical devices. The goal of this workshop is to discuss how, what does SHIP offer, and how does it interact with the various inventors? What does the process of navigating through SHIP look like, and what does success look like? So again, reintroduce myself. I'm a pediatric cardiac surgeon by training. I'm an active clinician. I've been in clinical work for over 20 years. In parallel, I've been involved in laboratory research. Early in my career, as more basic research. In the last 10 years, I've focused on developing medical devices with a specific pediatric application. I've been involved with the Pediatric Device Consortium from its inception, and over time have moved over to more advanced clinical applications of the medical devices. And with me today is John Parker, who has been the co-director of this workshop, and I'll let John introduce himself.
Good. Thank you, Pedro. Good morning, everyone. For those who are unable to attend our introductory session yesterday, my name is John Parker. I am both an investor and a philanthropist in children's health. I do this through two different organizations, Spring Hood Ventures, a for-profit venture capital fund focused on children's health, and as a trustee of the Charles Hood Foundation, an 80-year-old private foundation focused on supporting pediatric research. At the Hood Foundation, I'm involved in the grant making, and I established and manage the foundation's early-stage venture capital program, which is invested entirely in companies developing important medical solutions for children. Now, I need to get to the next slide. Can I get control of the slides? Thank you. Before we begin, Dr. Zanino and I would like to thank the team that worked over these last many months to develop this framework, particularly our other navigation stream members, Dr. Susan Alpert, Terry Burke, and Eric Chen, for their dedication to this effort over the last year. I would also like to give advance thanks to our panel participants, Dr. Jonathan Davis, Tara Federici, and Dr. Vassoon Paris. I'd also like to thank the very dedicated team at CPATH, members of the SHIP executive and coordinating committees. As a reminder, from yesterday's introductory session, the high-level objective of SHIP MD is to improve public health for children by de-risking and accelerating developmental processes to stimulate investment and innovation in pediatric devices. I want to reiterate a couple key messages that we discussed yesterday. Our goal is to incentivize the ecosystem to develop and to support the development of medical devices for the benefit of children. We want to incentivize, and we want to do it for children. Also, as a reminder of yesterday's conversation, we are currently in phase 1 of the development process, the pre-consortium conceptual phase. We have developed and will present a model that we believe meets the needs of the community and that adds value for all stakeholders. As members of the pediatric medical device community, whether you're an entrepreneur, work for a large medical device company, a clinician or a researcher, a hospital administrator, a government employee, an investor, a philanthropist, consultant, or perhaps even a patient or family member of a patient, your feedback will be vital to the decision to move forward with SHIP MD or not. And if we do move forward, your input will help inform the strategic plan that is developed in phase 2. So the navigation workstream has been tasked with thinking about the role that SHIP MD could play in the development of a pediatric device and what a journey through SHIP MD might look like. Again, at the highest level, we started with the premise that SHIP MD's mission should be to incentivize pediatric device development to improve health for children. SHIP MD will do this by functioning as an ongoing program for accelerating and de-risking pediatric device development. The foundation, and by far the most significant component of the program, will be to facilitate generation and evaluation of the evidence necessary to advance a pediatric device through the regulatory process. There are other services that ShipMD will provide in support of that effort and to ensure commercial success. We want to take steps to make sure that we are adding value for all stakeholders in the pediatric device ecosystem. But at its core, the framework is designed to better and more efficiently generate and evaluate evidence to support the development and approval of pediatric devices. By doing this, we hope to see more devices for children developed, approved, and ultimately achieving the commercial success that indicates that they are helping actual children on an ongoing basis. The journey that we're going to talk about is simple, and please indulge us our nautical references. We will walk through boarding or entry into ShipMD, sailing or enrollment in ShipMD, and disembarkation or exit from ShipMD. Once we have discussed our thinking on how this might work, we'll convene our panel and spend some time answering your questions and getting your feedback. In considering our mandate to define the role that ShipMD can play in accelerating and de-risking the developmental process for pediatric medical devices and examining what a journey through the ShipMD program might look like, we set out to answer a few specific questions. First, what is ShipMD's role in the pediatric medical device development process? In other words, what will ShipMD do and to what end? Second, what are the criteria for admittance to ShipMD? Third, what is the scope of the services that ShipMD will provide to innovators who enter the program? And finally, how do we define a successful journey through ShipMD? We've made good progress answering these questions, and at this stage, we look forward to getting your questions and comments to help us further refine the ShipMD concept. I'll come back to describing some of these details, but for right now, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Del Nido to take a little deeper dive into how we thought about the role of ShipMD.
Thank you, John. Some of this we talked about yesterday, but I think it's important to emphasize what is the role of the ShipMD and in contrast, what is it not. The main goal here is, and at the core of it, is to really facilitate evidence generation. And that evidence generation is for multiple purposes. It's to evaluate a concept or a device early on, but also to assess its clinical impact, whether it has a value clinically through clinical study and clinical evidence generation, and also whether it has commercial value. So that's important. There has to be success at the end of this, because we recognize the fact that unless the product actually is a commercial success, it will not get to the intended recipients. And so that component of it cannot be overlooked. So the goal of SHIP is to help in the assessment and preparation towards an evidence generation activity, whether that's a preclinical or more commonly a clinical study, clinical trial. And that component is the biggest part of the sale, if you will. We also recognize that there will be devices that are already approved but are looking for additional evidence for either a new indication or as part of the balance between pre- and post-approval evidence generation during a regulatory evaluation. So the main goal, though, is to really support the process of evaluation of a device, again, for both its clinical impact as well as its commercial value and how it will help ultimately help children in the future. So what are the services that SHIP can provide? Well, they refer to all the different components of what we just talked about for evidence generation, whether it's guidance towards development of the clinical study or what questions you want to address, how you're actually going to conduct that clinical trial. In other words, who is your target patient groups, where are you going to find those patients, what institutions can help you in the way of hospitals, can help you what their experience is. And then finally, some of the important administrative components of that, the contracting, the IRB approvals, all of the aspects of conducting a safe and useful clinical trial that provides evidence that can be utilized for regulatory approval. In addition to that, there is regulatory support. In other words, the linking to the regulatory agencies that can assist the inventor or the company in developing their approach, their strategy towards a particular indication and approval for their device. But also, not to forget the reimbursable pathway. In other words, the ability to actually be able to not only obtain reimbursable for the device once it's approved, but even in the process of the evaluation, how to ensure that the hospitals or the company doesn't bear the entire brunt of the cost of the device or of the study. Commercial guidance is important. Successful companies provide access to important clinical technology, and that is an area that cannot be overlooked. So the goal and the role of SHIP is really to take a very holistic approach to a device that's now ready for clinical evaluation and wants to be successful in the process of bringing it to children. In addition, I think it's important to recognize that SHIP lives within an ecosystem, as has been mentioned several times. There are a number of entities that try to assist concepts and ideas and technology that have relevance to pediatric health. However, SHIP, it has a very specific role. And in that role, because it is an evidence-generating role, it has to interact with a number of stakeholders. Here we've listed the ones that have participated the most so far, but we also cannot forget that at the end of the day, the ones who really are the most important stakeholders here are the children. They have a vested interest in SHIP being a successful entity. Stakeholders such as the hospitals, much of the activity will occur, particularly for the more complex devices, will occur within the hospitals, and they will be the ones that will be involved in much of the evaluation. Payers have a stake, both from the standpoint of understanding what the cost savings might be of a successful, effective therapy, as well as the cost of underwriting the development of that therapy. Funders, investors need to understand the value that's being provided and that advancing this technology to a successful commercial venture would provide. And government agencies, obviously, because they are entrusted with the role of evaluating the safety and the efficacy or the safety and benefit of these technologies. Industry plays a key role here. They should be generating the ideas or at least bringing the ideas, advancing them towards this level of evaluation, and ultimately bringing it to a successful exit into the commercial world. So with that, I'll turn it to John to talk about what the actual assumptions and questions are.
Good. Thanks, Pedro. So we have started with a laudable mission, and we've identified several considerations that will factor into creating an effective program. This led us to a pretty clear view of what SHIP-MD can be. I'm going to summarize a bit about the role and then move on to the journey. So first, SHIP-MD can be a platform to aid innovators in generating the evidence they need to meet regulatory requirements, satisfy payers, attract investors and perhaps buyers, and ultimately be deployed in a clinical setting. Our hope is that, among other things, SHIP-MD can organize and facilitate trials in member hospitals, leading children's hospitals, help innovators improve trial design, address issues that arise, and facilitate communication between the innovator and other stakeholders. Second, there are a number of other tasks beyond the trials themselves that we hope SHIP-MD will provide to improve the prospects of regulatory approval and commercial success. These are expected to include, as Pedro just mentioned, clinical guidance, regulatory and reimbursement support, and even strategic and business advice. And importantly, we need to do this with a view to accommodating the needs and contributions of all stakeholders. While we have advanced our thinking around this, we are eager to discuss it with those of you in the audience, particularly, how do you see the need for SHIP-MD? We know this diverse audience sees this question through different lenses. We hope you'll share your perspective through questions to our panelists and through written feedback during and after the workshop. We're also interested in your thoughts around whether we have identified the right scope of services. Are we missing anything? Are we trying to do too much? Please share your thoughts. Now I'm going to switch over from the broader role we expect SHIP-MD to play in the development of pediatric devices and talk about the journey through the system, starting with boarding the ship. We expect that entry into SHIP-MD will begin with an open application process. At a minimum, the application review would screen for whether or not an innovation qualifies for SHIP-MD. We have identified, somewhat obvious, but a short list of minimum qualifications. The innovation needs to be a medical device seeking regulatory approval for use in children. The innovation must be pursuing a regulatory pathway that requires evidence generation in a clinical setting. The innovation should essentially be ready to begin those clinical trials. And the innovator should be ready to start engaging with the FDA. Depending on innovator demand for SHIP-MD and capacity of the system, it may also be necessary to implement a process for choosing among qualified applicants. Great problem to have. But selecting among qualified innovations complicates the application process. Which innovations would be prioritized? Those addressing the greatest unmet needs, those with the best chance of commercial success, those that would benefit the most from SHIP-MD support. We haven't tried to answer those questions yet, but we'd be happy to get your thoughts in advance of doing so. We expect that SHIP-MD, once established, will have the staff to review, recommend, and decide on applications for acceptance. Staff work should also be augmented by external advisors to ensure technical depth and governance best practices. We believe that both of these pieces are necessary. If this is to be done right, it requires a full-time dedicated staff invested in making it happen. Because of potential challenges and conflicts, it's also critical that strong governance is put in place to ensure transparency and to manage the expectations and concerns of the wide variety of stakeholders involved here. Once an innovation is accepted into the program, it is admitted via a contract for services. We would expect there to be a base level of services around facilitation of clinical trials with options for additional services. The beauty of this is that innovators, once enrolled in SHIP-MD, will not need to execute separate contracts with each trial site and negotiate with every advisor. We recognize that a one-size-fits-all approach will not work, as each innovation will have unique needs, but we believe that having a standardized process will help accelerate that process. There is still work to be done in developing a transparent, fair set of terms for each innovation accepted into the system. The finance workstream will dive into this more, but it is important to be aware that SHIP-MD is expected to operate on a fee-for-service model. It succeeds if it offers clear, exceptional value for the innovators who will be paying for those services. Where we'd like your feedback on this process is around those minimum requirements for acceptance and some of the more advanced criteria. The general minimum criteria are very much baked into what SHIP-MD is, but there are still considerations worth thinking about. If an innovation is almost ready for SHIP-MD, can it be provisionally admitted to help iron out some final details? If the innovation has already done some of the things SHIP-MD would normally expect to support, such as pre-sub meetings or applying for breakthrough designation, can an innovation apply? Can an innovation apply for a real-world evidence or post-market evaluation only? We're thinking that all of these things make sense, but we'd appreciate your thoughts. When it comes to addressing the potential problem of having to select among qualified candidates, how would you prioritize innovations? Based on the importance of the medical need being addressed, the innovator's need for support, demand, commercial viability, please let us know. Once an innovation is enrolled in ShipMD, it can start to engage with the ecosystem. Since there will be standing agreements between ShipMD and member hospitals, it is our expectation that innovators can hit the ground running. This is a good time to come back to the concept of accelerating and de-risking. Because of the standing agreements we expect ShipMD to have with member hospitals, the clinical trial process should be accelerated. To be clear, we aren't talking about speeding up or otherwise changing the actual trials. We're talking about standardizing the process of setting up and managing trials. ShipMD can streamline the logistics of finding clinical champions, identifying and securing trial sites, helping with IRB approvals, and working through administrative details and paperwork. It can also ensure that lines of communications between innovators and trial sites are open and clear. Streamlining trial logistics will save time and money, improve return prospects for shareholders, notch more wins for hospitals, and improve an innovation's chance of commercial success. ShipMD can also help with the de-risking element. We throw that term around a lot, but we're talking about taking steps that increase the likelihood of success and that reduce exposure to things that could inhibit success. Knowledgeable early planning with folks who have done this before is extremely valuable to innovators, even those who have brought medical devices to market before. Careful planning minimizes the risk of having to restart trials or other projects or put things on hold while an issue is resolved. We would expect that ShipMD can provide innovators with exceptional clinical guidance, targeted regulatory and reimbursement strategies, and strong strategic and financial planning, and in doing so, significantly improve the risk profile of enrolled innovations. This is vital to improving prospects for raising investment capital, engaging with strategic partners, and selling to clinical and institutional buyers. By accelerating and de-risking, I have no doubt that ShipMD has the potential to enable the success of important pediatric devices that might otherwise fail. We have a lot to do before that happens, though. For now, I hope you'll contribute your thoughts on how we have thought about these core services around trial logistics and additional services that ShipMD can offer to improve the prospects for innovations enrolled in the program. While most of the work happens during sailing, disembarking or exiting from ShipMD is, in my mind, one of the most important pieces to get right at the outset. This is not just the point where an innovation finishes its journey through ShipMD. This is where we see whether an individual innovation achieves success as a ShipMD participant, and where ShipMD itself is achieving success in accelerating and de-risking multiple innovations. I'm sure we all agree that the ultimate measure of success is getting a pediatric device to the point where it is making a difference in the lives of actual children. Drilling down to the next level, though, success may mean very different things to different participants or stakeholders. For the innovator, success may mean regulatory approval. It may mean they took steps that allowed for a successful capital raise. It may mean they formed a vital industry partnership. For hospitals, success may mean they were involved in a win, where they bolstered their reputation or improved their bottom line. For regulators, especially our friends on the pediatric side, success may mean more quality pediatric applications. It may mean more victories that garner even more support for pediatric devices from government and the public. For payers, success may hinge on solutions that reduce costs by getting patients back home earlier or avoiding surgeries or other expensive procedures. For larger industry players, success may mean a more robust pipeline of innovations that can be acquired to fill portfolio gaps or build new business lines. For investors, success may lie in increased investment opportunity and returns. I'm just speculating on these measures of success, and I'm sure I've missed many, but in order for ShipMD to survive, it is important to make sure that we're providing wins for all stakeholders. It is also important that ShipMD communicate these successes and also failures for the benefit of all. Establishing a track record of success will further incentivize innovators to develop more pediatric devices. It will attract more investment dollars. And thinking about Olivia's inspiring talk in yesterday's plenary session Perhaps it will raise awareness among doctors so that they can make sure their patients have access to the best technology available. Whether we share those successes as PR through research papers or word of mouth, it will be important to get the word out. I hope we'll get your thoughts on what a successful journey through ShipMD looks like from your perspective. With our walk through, with our walk through with my walk through the ShipMD journey complete, I'm now going to hand the mic back to Dr. Del Nido to bring some context to this journey around the case studies that he discussed yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think if you attended the case studies presentation yesterday, this will be familiar. But in case you didn't, what we described yesterday were two examples of devices that were ready to navigate through the process of regulatory evaluation, approval, and commercial success. They were very different in the sense that the pathway was quite different in each. The first one was a longer pathway, higher risk device. This is a class 3 device, pediatric heart valve. And what we talked about was that the timeline for development is fairly standard, fairly well known. There's the early work that has to do with proof of concept and improvement on the initial design and evaluation, perhaps in vivo testing. And this is an area where I think many of our pediatric device consortia have played a critical role, is developing technology that can advance through these early stages and become a viable concept. Beyond that, getting now to the clinical evaluation is, I think, where SHIP comes in, is when we start to now finalize that design, when we begin to think in terms of how do we structure the data generation process, how do we think about how the reimbursement process will work itself out once the device is approved. All of this is where SHIP comes in. And for a class 3 device, it's that evidence generation may take several steps in the initial evaluation and discussion with regulators, generating that evidence so that a pre-submission meeting could be fruitful, and then conduct of the actual early feasibility study, and then eventually a pivotal trial. For a class 2 device, which was the second example that was given, a diagnostic device for ear infections, the pathway is in some ways simpler, but still SHIP plays a major role. Again, the concept needs to be developed earlier, and here I reemphasize the role of SHIP being within an ecosystem, the pediatric device consortia, individual hospitals, individual investigators sitting within an academic institution or even within industry can do this early work. But once it starts to get closer to the clinical evaluation, then SHIP can play a significant role in accelerating that process, whether it's in some of the early regulatory advice, and again, or a breakthrough designation. All of this is part of that evaluation and part of the assistance and the role that SHIP can play. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for their attendance today and open it up to our panel to entertain questions and comments.